All right, today we're cracking open one of the most fascinating and, frankly, totally bizarre legal disputes in ancient history. And look, forget modern courtrooms, we're talking about a case of literal cosmic proportions here. I mean, imagine being handed a sentence so horrifically disproportionate to your crime that you decide the only logical next step is to sue the judge. And we're not talking about just any judge, we're talking about the literal God of justice. So in this explainer, we're going to break down this incredible narrative from ancient texts that deals with absolute power, terrible mistakes, and the ultimate celestial appeals court.
So here's the question that really hooks you right from the start. What actually happens when the God of justice just gets it wrong? We base our entire understanding of divine or absolute authority on this premise of infallibility, right? The God of justice, by definition, is supposed to be perfect. The scales are supposed to be perfectly balanced. But what happens when that infallible system glitches? What happens when you get a severe punishment for an offense so absolutely minuscule you didn't even know you committed it? Keep that exact question in the back of your mind as we unfold this staggering story.
So the story kicks off with a scene straight out of a horror movie. We have this really powerful sage, a man of immense ascetic wealth and spiritual discipline, who has just been subjected to one of the most gruesome executions imaginable. He is impaled on a wooden stake. But here is the shocking twist that kicks off our entire ordeal. He simply cannot be killed. He just sits there, impaled, literally defying death through sheer willpower and spiritual fortitude. It's wild.
Okay, let's dive right into this chaotic opening scene. The unkillable sage and a king's mistake.
Because as it turns out, the sage was never actually supposed to be on that stake in the first place. This was a catastrophic administrative error on a royal level. The local authorities quickly realized they have made a grave mistake. First, the officers of justice discover the sage is actually still alive and they immediately sprint to inform the king. Second, the king is completely terrified. He rushes to the scene with his advisors and practically begs the sage for a pardon, pleading that he offended him in complete ignorance. And remarkably, the sage is pacified. He lets go of his anger. But then comes step 3. When the king tries to fix his mistake and actually extract the stake from the sage's body, he completely fails. It is stuck fast. So, step 4. In a highly botched, desperate attempt to remedy the situation, the king just cuts the stake off right at the surface of the skin.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how the sage turns this horrific physical trauma into a badge of supreme cosmic authority. He literally just walks around with a portion of this wooden stake still lodged inside his body, and rather than being weakened by it, he actually practices the austerest of penances in that state. The text tells us he goes on to conquer numberless regions unattainable by others. Because of this bizarre and terrifying condition, he becomes famous across the 3 worlds, earning a new, very literal title, Ani-Mandavya, which translates to Mandavya with the stake within. He survived the unsurvivable, and now, he wants answers.
Which brings us to our next chapter, the cosmic courtroom, and the process of suing the divine.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how far he's willing to go. Ani-Mandavya doesn't just let this whole impalement thing go. Armed with his new, terrifying reputation and immense ascetic power, he decides to take his grievance straight to the absolute top. He knows the king was just an ignorant middleman. So Ani-Mandavya literally ascends to the abode of the God of justice himself. He walks into the highest courtroom in existence as the ultimate relentless plaintiff, goes right up to the throne and demands, "What praise that sinful act committed by me unconsciously, for which I am bearing this punishment? Oh, tell me soon and behold the power of my asceticism." I mean, wow, he isn't asking for a favor here. He is demanding legal justification, and he's subtly threatening the god with his own immense power if the answer isn't good enough.
So what was the actual crime? Let's look at the grass blade incident and the evidence revealed.
To truly understand this case, I need you to brace yourself for the evidence the God of justice actually presents. You would think, right, that to be impaled on a stake, Ani-Mandavya must have committed high treason or murder or, destroyed an entire city. But the crime? Piercing a little insect on a blade of grass. And wait, it gets worse. He did this when he was just a child. The punishment for that? Being brutally impaled on a massive wooden stake as an adult. The staggering, almost absurd disparity here defies all common sense. How on earth could the supreme God of justice justify this?
Well, to understand the god's really bizarre legal reasoning, we have to look at this core principle, karmic multiplication. The God of justice tells the sage that just as a gift, however small, multiplies in respect of its religious merits, so a sinful act multiplies in respect of the woe it brings in its train. Basically, and this is wild, the God is arguing for a sort of cosmic compound interest on sin. You pierce a bug as a little kid, that sin gathers interest over decades, and by the time you're an adult, the debt you owe is an impalement.
Ani-Mandavya listens to this explanation, and he is absolutely not having it. It's time for rewriting karmic law and establishing precedent.
This is where the story completely pivots from a personal grievance into a profound legal revolution. Ani-Mandavya turns the tables entirely. He stops being the plaintiff and steps right into the role of the ultimate appellate judge, completely ready to tear down the divine system's flawed logic. He lays out this ironclad legal argument. First, he argues that acts committed by children up to the 12th year of their age from birth are simply not sins. They completely lack the maturity and intent required for culpability. Second, he declares that the scriptures shall not recognize such childhood acts as sinful. And third, he directly calls out the God's sentencing guidelines, stating that the punishment inflicted for such a venial or minor offense was wildly disproportionate in its severity. He is legally dismantling the whole concept of punishing children like adult criminals.
So, the crucial point here is the number 14. You see, Ani-Mandavya doesn't just argue his own case and leave it at that. He actively legislates a brand new cosmic limit. He declares to the God of justice, "From this day I establish this limit in respect to the consequence of acts that an act shall not be sinful when committed by one below the age of 14. He effectively rewrites the fundamental laws of the universe right there in the throne room. He ensures that no one above that age can ever be held cosmically liable for the ignorant mistakes of their youth.
But Ani-Mandavya isn't done yet. Setting a new precedent just isn't enough. There has to be accountability for the judicial malpractice that already occurred. So, the god becomes mortal, and the judge gets sentenced.
This is the ultimate twist in our story. The God of justice is actually about to face the consequences of his own unbalanced scales. Ani-Mandavya points out a fatal, glaring flaw in the god's actions. By subjecting the sage, who is a Brahmana, to a punishment meant to kill him, the God of justice committed a grave offense. The ancient texts tell us the killing of a Brahmana involves a sin that is heavier than the killing of any other living being. Because the god handed down a disproportionate sentence that technically amounted to this massive sin, Ani-Mandavya curses him. Think about that. He literally disbars the divine judge from heaven. The sentence? The God of justice must be born among mortal men in the Shudra order.
And the curse actually takes hold. The God of justice is forced into a mortal incarnation, born as Vidura in the Shudra order. But what's really fascinating here is that even in mortal form, his core essence remains, although it's fundamentally humbled and grounded. As Vidura, he is incredibly well-versed in the doctrines of morality, politics, and worldly profit. He is entirely free from covetousness and wrath. He possesses this great foresight and undisturbed tranquility of mind, dedicating his entire earthly life to the welfare of the Kurus. So this harsh, uncompromising God of the heavens is transformed into a wise, balanced, and incredibly grounded mortal counselor.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought. If an ancient text tells us that even the supposedly infallible God of justice can get it wrong, and maybe more importantly, must face severe, life-altering consequences for handing down a disproportionate sentence, what does that say about us? It brilliantly highlights this timeless human anxiety. You know, when a system of law relies on severe, compounding punishment for minor infractions, it ultimately breaks. Ani-Mandavya survived the unsurvivable to rewrite the rules, but it really makes you wonder, in our own modern world, who is holding the scales, and who exactly is judging our judges today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the big questions, and I'll catch you next time.